Good morning. Welcome to the decision session for Executive Member for Environment and Climate Emergency on Wednesday, the 5th of July. Welcome, everybody. Just before we start the meeting, I want to do quick introductions because we're new. My name's Kate Revilius, and I am Joint Executive Member for Environment and Climate Emergency. And I'm here together with Jenny Kent, who is my colleague on that portfolio. Just to briefly describe how we're splitting that role, I'm going to be covering the carbon reduction side of things, and I'll let Jenny introduce herself.
So I'll be more on the environment side, which includes public realm and waste. I won't give the details, but the way it's split in scrutiny is roughly the way the portfolio will be split between us.
And so I'll be chairing today's meeting because air quality is coming under the side that I'm looking after. But future decision sessions, we will alternate who's chairing depending on what's on the agenda. So without further ado, are there any declarations of interest today? No? Okay. And the minutes from the previous meeting, has anyone got any corrections to offer? Do I just sign them here? You want to sign them? Okay, so we'll move to the public participation section of the meeting. We've got 3 public speakers and 1 written representation, which I'll read later. So we'll start with our first public participant, Flick Williams, who I believe is attending remotely. Flick, are you able to join us?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Flick. You've got 3 minutes and I will let you know when 3 minutes is up.
Value of clean air to health outcomes and well-being is clearly established. Leaving transport aside, I do note from the report the mention of the discouragement of ice cream vans from idling. But what is not mentioned anywhere in the report is the trend toward the growth of street food vans and vendors using diesel generators for hours and hours at a time within the Foot Streets area. But as there are no monitoring stations within the area requiring counter-terror hostile vehicle mitigation, there can be no means of measuring the effect on air quality that these will have. Add to this the attractions such as merry-go-rounds, Ferris wheels and the like, often operating with multiple diesel generators. In addition to the unmeasured effect these have on air quality in the city centre, they add significantly to both noise pollution in the centre and cause further obstruction to the flow of pedestrian movement. This is particularly galling when these food vendors are surrounded by empty premises. Both Feesgate and Davygate are particular examples of this during last winter's Christmas market. During the last council term, there was discussion at climate emergency scrutiny about ensuring businesses kept their doors closed during the winter months in the interests of energy conservation. As a wheelchair user for whom many shops are inaccessible, I regularly conduct business out on the street. One such example is Tulliver's on Colliergate. I attract the attention of sales staff by knocking on the window. They come out, I ask for the items I wish to purchase. They are then gathered and brought out to me together with the card reader for me to make my payment. Last November, even this process became an impossibility, having to shout over the 3 diesel generators powering the carousel on King's Square. I wish to support local businesses and not resort to buying still more of the goods I require online. Has any real thought been given to the increased use of diesel generators in this way? It seems to run counter to requiring buses and taxis to meet low emission standards to promote air quality and have no restriction on the use of diesel run generators with all the additional issues they introduce. I would invite proper consideration of this aspect of air quality and how the city centre public realm is used going forward as part of that wider conversation. And by way of a postscript, I would add that as a clinically vulnerable to the level 3 pathogen still in community transmission person, I and many others like me would welcome the time when indoor air quality in all council-run buildings is given the same weight of importance as outdoor air quality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Flick. You've raised some really interesting issues, and I will be asking about those later in the meeting, and I'm happy to talk to you about them at another point. So thank you for raising those, and thank you for coming along. We'll move on to our next public speaker, Councillor Dave Merritt. I'll give you 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when 3 minutes is up.
Thank you. I should just note my particular interests as a member of Clean Air York, York Healthy Air, York Environment Forum, and I also touch on the issue in my roles policy-wise for York Labour Party and York and District Trades Union Council. But I'm particularly speaking as a Guildhall councillor today, because obviously it's one of the wards most affected by the poor air quality on our streets. The report covers the excellent work that the council's air quality team have been doing over many years, and it's very pleasing to see just how successful they've been in attracting grants and tackling some of those issues. But yet, if you actually look particularly on page 15, at the graph there showing the long-term trends. The trends, generally speaking, have been slowly down, but they seem to be tailing off in some areas. And we are still miles above the World Health Organization guideline of a 10 microgram per meter cubed for nitrogen dioxide. And that is very concerning. As you'll note from the paper earlier, it gives the national death figures between 29,000 and 43,000. Pro rata for York, that is around 87 to 123 deaths a year. That's 2 deaths a week, premature related to air quality, pro rata. And that is an enormous price to pay for the levels of pollution that we have. And obviously it's not just nitrogen dioxide, there's obviously other pollutants, particularly the small particulates that particularly heavily contribute. So I think it does raise the question, has the previous air quality action plan and low emission strategy been right? Yes, it might have got us a long way towards the national legal target, but it leaves us miles off. If you extrapolate those lines, then some of the lower figures will probably take to the mid-2030s to get down to the World Health Organization limit. The upper ones, the general, probably to the mid-2040s. Places like Gillygate do not appear to be improving at all. Actually, the figure in Gillygate is worse than it was 7 years ago. So I think what that says is we need some additional actions, particularly to tackle the hotspots that aren't moving. And I'd obviously hope that the forthcoming local transport plan, as well as the new Air Quality Action Plan 4, will pay particular attention to that sort of issue. The final additional comment that I wanted to make is in regard to the move to electric vehicles. The city centre, both sides of the city centre and beyond, have a large amount of terraced housing. Oxfordshire has been undertaking a trial for across pavement charging facilities outside people's houses, which would be an enormous boon to allowing people who live in those areas to purchase electric vehicles without having to trek enormous distances to actually charge their vehicles. I would hope that the exec members would also look favourably to perhaps undertaking a pilot similar scheme to Oxfordshire to test out how feasible and how potentially useful it would be in York. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, again, some really important issues that you've raised there. Thank you for coming, and I will raise those later in the meeting. Our final public participant, Jeff Beacon. I'll let you know when 3 minutes is up. Okay, welcome.
Hello. I'm glad I was after Dave. He made some very good points. May I make a comment about the agenda for this meeting? Although 100 people a year dying in York is bad news, it's nothing like the climate emergency we face. And I think every meeting of any environment committee meeting should have a note on the current state of the global climate. I mean, one particular graph that caught me lately starts in 2003 at 0.4 watts per square meter, and now is over 3 times as much. And I hope some of you could know what that graph is. If you don't, it ought to be printed, and similar graphs ought to be part of every agenda, at the top of every agenda. It's the amount of heat that we're receiving from the sun in excess of the heat that's going out, and it's gone up 3 times in 20 years and doesn't show much sign of slowing down. That's why we've got the problems with it, and they are getting to the point where they threaten life as we know it. But this is about local air quality. I've got a few comments to make on that. Not as detailed as Dave's, but at random. Air quality management areas. Air quality management areas are for residents. And I noticed in this report, there's support for walking around York. There's no measurement of air pollution that is relevant to walkers. And in some cases, like walking down Gilligate's mentioned as a bad spot. But have you looked at where the main measurement facility is in Gilligate? It's just over a high wall. Now, I suspect that on the opposite, well, it's obvious that on the other side of the street, at person level and at child level, pollution is much worse. I know there are difficulties in putting measurement facilities at person and child level.
3 minutes.
But we could do some modelling on that.
Yeah.
An art gallery up Blossom Street had an interesting exhibition of a bike that was cycling around measuring pollution. I think the council ought to do some measurements near the measurement facilities, but at person level and often on the other side of the street. Another example, apart from the Gilligate one, is Merchant Gate. There's a diffusion tube outside Tesco's 3 meters up, nice windy spot, won't get a lot of nitrogen dioxide in it. But you go to the other end of Merchant Gate, and just round the corner, there aren't any, as far as I can see anyway. And these would give a much different value. And at that spot, I know because I live up an alleyway there, particulate matter, horrible sticky stuff, drops on anything inside our gate. And I did live at the end of Merchant Gate for a while. And
I'll
had
have
to get
to
out because
Stop
of
you
the,
there. Thank you.
had to get
Yeah,
out because of the pollution.
thank you. You've raised some really good points again, and I'm going to bring those into the meeting later. Thank you very much.
You have to say that every time, don't you?
Okay, on to the agenda item 4, the air quality annual status report. Mike, I welcome you to present this to us.
This is on the report rather than responding directly to. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks. My presentation here is on the report rather than responding particularly to the questions of public speakers, but I can speak on those in a minute if you'd like me to. Nitrogen dioxide concentrations continue the long-term general downward trend of the past 10 years. Although there were improvements in some areas of the air quality management area in 2022, pollution concentrations in most areas were broadly similar to 2021, but remain lower than pre-pandemic levels of 2019. Having said that, air quality meets the health-based air quality objectives across most areas of York, except for 3 technical breach areas. Within the city centre, they include the following roads: Gillygate, Bootham, St Leonard's Place, Blossom Street and Rougier Street. Highest concentration of NO2 recorded at a relevant location, that's a location where somebody lives or spends a prolonged period of time, was 47 micrograms per metre cubed on Gillygate. The limit is 40. And this is again consistent with the 2021 figures. Concentrations of particulates, PM10 and PM2.5, remain well within the current and recently strengthened health-based air quality objectives for these pollutants. Those are the statutory objectives that we have to align ourselves with rather than the WHO targets, which were not adopted by the UK government. In terms of air quality measures, City of York Council continues to deliver on a wide range of measures within the 3rd Air Quality Action Plan, including the bus-based city centre, clean air zone and electrification of York's bus fleet. We continue to support the electrification of council vehicles. Electric and hybrid taxis are supported via the council's low emission taxi grant scheme, and we currently have 34.4% of our taxis and private hire vehicles as electric or hybrid. We do our best to minimise emissions via the planning process. We have our Kick for Habit anti-idling policy campaign and patrols. We aim to develop the air quality grant funded last mile freight delivery pilot for the city centre, and we support electric vehicle infrastructure. Our actions for 2023-24, aside from those, is really to develop our 4th air quality action plan with a focus on raising awareness of the impact of poor air quality on health to help people to make decisions. A DEFRA-funded early alert system for vulnerable people, particularly those with respiratory problems and other illnesses, and raising awareness on particulates from heating and other sources, plus incorporating the air quality priorities of the new administration. The executive members are asked to note the contents of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and really thank you for all the work you've put into this and the progress that's occurred. There's a few questions I'd like to ask, and I'd also like to pick up on some of the points that public participants have brought along.
Okay.
I think the first thing is just if you can give us a bit of an update of where we are with our Air Quality Action Plan 4, and when we can sort of expect to have that in place.
Okay. Currently we have a draft consultation of it, so it's not complete. It needs incorporating the commitments which will be in the council plan. So it needs updating on that basis, but we're pretty much ready to go. But it is obviously tied in with other council corporate plans, such as the local plan for climate change strategy, the 4th local transport plan. So I think the director responsible for those plans is keen to sort of align them all together. So we're in a queue somewhere to be determined by another director, so I'll await guidance on that, but the draft is there. Draft update includes measures and targets from the third air quality action plan, but we're looking for a plan that will last over the next 5 years. The additional measures that are likely to go in it, apart from, as I mentioned, are the growing evidence base around the health impacts of particulate matter, incorporating the new targets included in the Environment Act 2021 and DEFRA's new air quality strategy. So those are our legal responsibilities. We're looking at updating emissions source apportionment work, which basically means where the pollution is coming from in York, so that we're targeting those most polluting activities and not just having a general approach to everything. We're looking at where we are in terms of the health-based objectives and those reflected in the graphs that Councillor Merritt referred to earlier. We want to do additional work, in particular regarding freight movements, since the publication of our third air quality action plan, and working on the 2 projects, as I said, the alert system and raising awareness of the impacts of particulates on pollution. So that's roughly what we're doing in terms of AQAP4.
Okay, that's really good to hear. Some of the other questions I've got follow on from that and also reflect what public participants have asked me. In terms of monitoring stations, when I look at the map of monitoring stations, our permanent monitoring stations, there are seemingly some potential gaps. And as part of that Air Quality Action Plan 4, might we be worth considering whether we need any further permanent monitoring stations, and have we any idea of how much it costs to install?
Yeah, I mean, I think people reflect very much on the air quality monitoring stations because they're big and easily visible, as Jeff has alluded to. You know, the size of wardrobes or big boxes, and they're noticeable. Most of our monitoring, however, is done through diffusion tubes, and we've got 234 of those around the city, and they're on our website. So there are our basic monitors, and they give good results and show trends over many years. Hence, we're able to produce that graph showing trends in air quality. The diffusion tube network was, and the air quality monitoring stations were put up for specific purposes in specific places. A lot of the air quality monitoring stations are in technical breach areas where we're breaching the health-based air quality objectives. Jeff says the one in Gillygate might not be in the best place. It's the only place, unfortunately, in Gillygate. And there are some places where you simply cannot fit an air quality monitoring station at all. So we've done our best to try and locate those air quality monitoring stations. We co-locate them with diffusion tubes at the same point, and there are usually diffusion tubes closer to the street level, on lampposts, etc., to better reflect what people are breathing in at that particular point. How much does it cost to set up an air quality monitoring station? Well, as I say, apart from the challenge of space and ownership of land, there's also the issue around electricity supply that needs to be available. The advantage that permanent air quality monitoring stations have over diffusion tubes is, one, the diffusion tubes only measure nitrogen dioxide, and we measure them on a monthly basis, whereas of course the air quality monitoring stations are continuous. However, they are dear. A new air conditioning enclosure with nitrogen dioxide and PM 2.5 monitoring costs approximately £27,000 to purchase. As I say, we have 9 of those. Then we have a service and maintenance contract to make sure that it's working properly. That's another £3,500 a year. Then we have a data management contract. That's about £800 a year per station. Then they have to be audited. That's £300 a year per station. And then of course there's the staff time to go out to make sure that they're all working properly. So they aren't cheap. We have a PM 2.5 monitor, which is where our focus is about £14,000 on its own, as well as the costs I've just described. We currently monitor particulates at a number of sites in York. That's Fishergate, Bootham, Gillygate, and Holgate, where we monitor PM 2.5. Plantation Drive, we only monitor PM 10. Our Fishergate and Bootham sites are both affiliated. We monitor PM 10 and PM 2.5. Those are both affiliated to DEFRA's national monitoring network. So DEFRA have a lot of the costs of those. And our sites at Gillygate and Holgate will be upgraded next week to PM 2.5. We've been going through over the last 12 months or so an upgrade process to replace some of the older enclosures, the air conditioning, and install PM 2.5 monitors. So they'll be upgraded next week with the most recent DEFRA approved PM 2.5 monitoring equipment to monitor the new standards in the Environment Act. We also have to remember that particulate concentrations, although historically they've been affected by traffic pollution, they aren't the only source of pollution. And more we're finding that it's other sources such as domestic heating and commercial heating that's impacting on particulates. So the question is, do they always need to be sited by the roadside? And the answer is no, not always. Yeah, we don't necessarily need to monitor particulates at every site in the city because particulates tend to be fairly even across the city because there's so many other sources affecting it and so many external sources to York. Particulates travel very long distances and, you know, we can pick up particulates from North Africa, from Europe, from Scandinavia and elsewhere. So.
That's really helpful. James, I'll let you bring you in.
I was just going to say, DEFRA did produce some guidance about placement of diffusion tubes, and it does talk about between 2 and 4 meters as their recommended location.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I take on board Jeff's comments. The issue is we have to follow the DEFRA guidelines. That's how we get our funding. That's to show legal compliance with the objectives.
You don't have to. You can put some extra ones in if you wish.
We can.
You could do some extra monitoring. You could send around person level monitoring as a separate project. I'm sure that people that did the pollution fight would be happy to do a bit of work for you for much less than you're talking about.
Right. I'll close that conversation there. But
could I just comment on
yes,
that?
Yeah.
We did initially, when we started air quality monitoring, have the tubes a little bit lower. James has already said about the heights for acceptable in DEFRA. Unfortunately, people take them. That's the problem of having low down. People think, what's this? This is interesting. I'll have one of those, or they get vandalized or whatever. And that's just the nature of it, I'm afraid.
One thing I want to pick up on is Flick mentioned about diesel generators in the city centre. We don't have a permanent monitoring station within the foot streets, I think. Obviously, we do have diffusion tubes, but what are we doing to monitor that particular pollution source?
We did used to have an air quality monitoring station in St Sampson's Square, so you couldn't get closer to, I guess, the diesel generators. We found the concentrations were so low that we weren't really, we couldn't really justify.
When was that then?
Oh, probably 10 years ago now.
And have we got a good network of diffusion tubes in the city centre, in the foot streets?
We've got a good network. What I would say is we have asked, because we do get complaints on a regular basis about diesel generators in the city centre, we have asked for electric supplies to be put in, so there are alternatives. That falls outside of my remit, but I'd be very keen to see those. What we have done, and the other point that Flick mentioned, was things like street vendors and ice cream vans. The ice cream vans now, many of those do have electric supplies. They don't have to use diesel generators. It's a process.
Okay, that's something we need to think about for that air quality action plan for, I think, because obviously the city centre environment, there's lots of people there. Sorry, yeah, James.
I was just going to say that project to improve the electricity supply into the foot streets was part of our unsuccessful levelling up fund bid. So it sits there as a project that, you know, officers are aware of that need in any regeneration project in the Parliament Street, you know, is the obvious location. So
Yeah.
power supply to that is absolutely on officers' radar.
Okay. And I also just wanted to pick up on both Dave and Jeff were sort of pointing out that our air quality seems to have plateaued somewhat. And one of the obvious things that we can and will do in the coming years is really look at our transport system in the city centre and around and further around. But when I was looking through the key performance indicators in this most recent report, I couldn't see anything that would help us to measure modal shift. And that's going to be important in terms of improving air quality. So is there a way in which we can monitor that modal shift and use that to keep tabs on how we're doing and what impact that's having on air
I'm
quality?
sure there is, but that would fall outside my remit. That's
Yeah.
definitely a transport issue.
So we do have some KPIs about modal use. They are a bit like air quality. They are snapshots that you monitor over long periods of time. I don't think they necessarily give you accurate total figures, but we do have within the KPI the number of people walking into the city centre, the number of cyclists at certain key points. So we do look at that. I think on the back of LTP4, there is absolutely an opportunity to look at how we develop that monitoring. So whether we can have a more accurate system of monitoring, there is absolutely something to look at in terms of that.
Mhm.
So yes, we can complement some data. We can certainly improve the data we collect. But that's the sort of how we achieve it piece, isn't it? To drive those figures.
I mean, I'm certainly aware they do traffic counts, they do cycle counts. Obviously, they do bus patronage because that feeds into some of the figures that we look at. But as I say, that falls outside of my area of responsibility.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's something to bear into mind when we're looking at that action plan 4. Jenny, is there anything else you wanted to ask?
Yeah, just to one point to pick up. I think it was Councillor Merritt mentioned the cross pavement charging in Oxfordshire. So the team in transport are actually talking very closely to Oxfordshire because we are working on similar projects. So we have committed to bring a report back to, I mean, it was under the previous administration, so we haven't yet spoken to the chair about it, but we did commit to bring a report back on the lessons and the pilots that happen across the country and the pros and cons of those and how they would apply to a York context for some further discussion. Because there are, as Oxford have told us, there are pros and cons to the solutions they're trialling.
That's great. I completely forgot to read the written representation that I've had. Is it appropriate to read that now or no? Okay, so the written representation was about the last mile delivery hub, and just so to have it on the record, I'm going to ask to have an update on that last mile freight plan. And we'll bring that to a future decision session, either transport or environment. Okay, I think so. I'm very happy with the air quality annual status report. And the last item, is there any other urgent business? Dave?
And Dave also forgot to mention he got the bridge shut for a while through the bridge. And it technically didn't start at early enough in the morning to get the bus to
Right.
I can just drop them up, take them into their jobs.
Okay, with that note, we'll stop the meeting.